Ladies and gentlemen, here is the latest bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. Toronto, Canada. Professor Morse of Macmillan University reports observing a total of 3 explosions on the planet Mars between the hours of 7:45 p.m. and 9:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
It all played itself out as if this was really happening. This was really one of the first, if not the first, modern media hoaxes. The public were fooled. People turned on their radio and heard this story of invading Martians, and rather than thinking, hey, this is great entertaining sci-fi, this was being presented to them as if it was a news bulletin, and people started panicking.
I suspect a lot of people who listened to this there and then at the time were terrified. However, there were quite clear announcements made at the beginning of the program as to what it was.
The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
People were concerned. There were concerns. People called into the New Jersey State Police, for example. Absolutely, they did. Some of the stories are quite funny. One guy supposedly got his wife in the car and went right through the garage door. And when she complained, he said, well, we won't need it anymore because the Martians are coming. Some of the stories are funny, but you see that something else is going on other than strict reporting.
The War of the Worlds hoax was huge in terms of sort of the fallout and I guess the mythology around the hoax afterwards. People, reportedly committing suicide and losing their minds and running around. But interestingly enough, there wasn't that many people tuned in that night to listen to the hoax.
The Mercury Theatre on the Air shows were a series without commercial interruptions, which added to the program's realism. But this episode was quite different.
I think the thinking with a lot of this is that people were listening to something else that had commercials and switched channels, and you're happily listening to whatever else on the other channel, their commercials. You flip over and what you hear is, the aliens have landed and they're here now and there's a big beam coming out of the... And they'd have gone, oh my God, this is a news broadcast. It sounds like a news broadcast because no one else had done that. They hadn't used that style before.
It might be a face, it might be...
Incredible as it may seem, both the observations of science and the evidence of our eyes lead to the inescapable assumption that those strange beings who landed in the Jersey farmlands tonight are the vanguard of an invading army from the planet Mars.
Yes, there were clear elements of trying to create something for listeners that was extremely believable. They used the news flash format, which was a new thing for a play. They used real place names. They brought on somebody they described as the Secretary of the Interior, who sounded an awful lot like President Roosevelt. I think that shows, yes, there was some intent to deceive. Could they possibly have predicted how big it would become? No.
Radio was a trusted friend that was in your living room and you believed it. And you knew the difference between a real story and a false story by the way that it was told. Well, it's very clear that Orson Welles knew this, because when he came up with the story, this wasn't put in the language of drama or of fiction. This was made to sound as realistic as possible. This was made to sound like a news bulletin. And the population at the time inevitably believed it.
What's the matter with you?
The baby! The monsters! The monsters are going to kill us!
Now, monsters, what monsters? What are you...
The radio!
It's not a standard radio play. It's not one person talks, another person talks. It's a very jumbled, mixed up, fake live broadcast in which there's gunfire can be heard, people seemingly sort of croaking, dying, broadcast being interrupted, intermittent music suddenly having to appear to cover up a breakdown in broadcasts, sounds of aliens attacking. It is a very, very compelling piece of radio. you might think it'd be very easy to scoff at, but no, it's not. You know, it was made in 1938. We're a long way from 1938 today, and even today, it still sounds pretty compelling.